Most people lose arguments not because they are wrong, but because they don't know how to ask the right questions. Socrates understood something timeless. A single, well-placed question is more powerful than 1,000 statements. Today, you will discover 8 brutal questions inspired by the Socratic method. Questions so precise, so piercing, that they can dismantle any weak argument, expose contradictions, and force clarity where confusion once ruled. These are not tricks. They are tools, weapons of reason. And once you learn to use them, conversations, debates, and even personal conflicts will never look the same. Imagine walking into an argument absolutely convinced that you're right. Your chest is lifted, your mind is firm, and you're ready to defend your point with everything you've got. But then, someone looks you in the eyes and asks a single question. A simple question. A sharp, precise, uncomfortable question. And suddenly, the ground beneath your certainty begins to crack. That is the power of the Socratic method. What most people forget is that Socrates never argued to win. He argued to reveal, to uncover illusions, expose false assumptions, and strip away the layers of ego people use to protect their fragile beliefs. And that's why his method survives to this day, used by philosophers, lawyers, negotiators, psychologists, and military strategists. The truth is this: most arguments are not strong. They only look strong when they are never tested. The Socratic method is not aggression. It's not shouting. It's not humiliation. It's something far more dangerous. It forces people to think. And thinking, truly thinking, is one of the rarest skills we have as a species. Most people don't want clarity. They want comfort. They don't want to discover the truth. They want to protect the version of reality that hurts the least. But the Stoic doesn't live like that. A Stoic invites the question. A Stoic welcomes the discomfort of doubt. A Stoic prefers a painful truth over a pleasant lie. Because deep down, he knows something that the common man tenta ignorar. You can't be unshakable if your beliefs collapse at the first sign of pressure. That's where the Socratic method and Stoic philosophy merge. Socrates gives you the blade that cuts through illusion. The Stoics give you the strength to hold the blade, even when it cuts your own ego first. And once you master these 8 brutal questions, you gain 2 powers that define an unbreakable man. 1. You cannot be manipulated emotionally. 2. You cannot be dragged into useless arguments because you disarm them before they even begin. But there's a reason this method feels harsh. A reason it feels like mental combat. Because it is. Every question is a strike. Every answer is a test. Every contradiction that emerges is another illusion dying in front of you. And most men can't handle that. They react with anger, deflection, sarcasm, or attacks. Not because your question is wrong, but because their ego is weak. The man who gets irritated when questioned is telling you, "I built my identity on shaky ground and you just stepped on it." But the Stoic? He is different. He stands firm. He allows his ideas to be examined, challenged, pressured, because he understands that only what survives the questioning deserves to be believed. This is why the Socratic method is feared. Not because it creates conflict, but because it removes the comfortable illusions people cling to. Before we dive into all 8, understand something crucial. These questions are not meant to embarrass anyone. They are meant to expose the foundation that an argument stands on, or collapses on. If the foundation is weak, the person will instinctively react with emotion instead of logic, and that's when the method begins to work. Let's begin with the first 3 brutal questions. 1. What exactly do you mean? This may be the simplest, but it's also the deadliest. Almost every heated disagreement starts because people are not even talking about the same thing. You'd be shocked at how many arguments evaporate the moment you ask this. People love throwing big, vague terms. He's disrespectful. This is unfair. You're wrong. This never works. But what does any of that actually mean? Socrates understood that vague language is a smokescreen used by the mind to protect itself from being pinned down. When someone must define their ideas clearly, they can no longer hide behind emotion. A Stoic man doesn't fight fog. He clears it. When you ask, "What exactly do you mean?" you force the other person to reveal whether they have clarity or whether they're speaking from confusion. Most arguments die right here. 2. How do you know that? This question slices even deeper. People rarely question the origin of their beliefs. Most inherited them from childhood, culture, the internet, or the emotional experiences that shaped them. But when you ask calmly and without aggression, "How do you know that?" you're basically saying, "Show me the evidence, show me the source, show me the reality." If they can't, they feel exposed, not by you, but by their own lack of grounding. This is where a Stoic shines. He never believes something just because he feels it. He believes it because it has survived examination. Socrates used this question to dismantle entire philosophical positions. You can use it to disarm false accusations, emotional outbursts, and manipulative arguments. Without evidence, an argument dissolves, and the person must face the truth. They're defending a belief, not a fact. 3. Can you give me an example? Now we move to the third strike, and this one forces the person to leave theory and confront reality. Many people generalize wildly. "You always do this." "Nobody respects me." "Everything is going wrong." Men are all the same. Emotion loves exaggeration. It pulls small events and stretches them into entire realities. But when you ask, "Can you give me an example?" you bring them back into concrete, objective truth. Most of the time they cannot, because their claim wasn't based on a real pattern. It was based on a moment of emotional bias. A Stoic understands that examples anchor claims to truth. One clear example is worth more than 1,000 emotional statements. If they can't name even one, the argument collapses under its own weight. How these 3 questions work together. These first questions are designed to attack the structure of confusion. Definition: what exactly are you saying? Evidence: how do you know it's true? Example: when has this actually happened? If a claim survives these 3, then you're dealing with something real. But if it doesn't, you've just exposed an illusion. The Stoic man doesn't attack people. He attacks confusion. He attacks vague thinking. He attacks emotional distortions that poison communication. Because clarity is strength, confusion is weakness, and arguments built on confusion fall with the slightest pressure. When you master these questions, you don't win arguments, you end them before they begin. By now you've learned how the first 3 Socratic strikes tear apart the fog of vague claims, weak evidence, and emotional exaggeration. But the next questions go deeper. They don't just challenge the argument, they challenge the thinker. These questions force a person to confront contradictions, to face the limits of their own logic, and to choose between truth and ego. And most people, sadly, choose ego, because reality is harder to swallow than illusion. Let's continue. 4. Is that always true? This is where the conversation shifts from clarity to exposure. Human beings have a natural addiction to extremes. Emotion thinks in absolutes. You never listen. You always do this. Everything is ruined. No one cares. But Stoics know that absolutes almost never reflect reality. So when you calmly ask, "Is that always true?" you corner the exaggeration that the emotional mind uses to justify its reactions. Suddenly, the person must pause. Their mind begins scanning for exceptions, and exceptions destroy extremes. Even one single exception is enough to shatter their claim. You're not attacking them. You're attacking the distorted lens through which they're seeing the world. Once the exaggeration breaks, logic returns. 5. What would change your mind? This is one of the most devastating Socratic questions ever created. Why? Because it forces the person to reveal whether they are seeking truth or simply protected by their ego. If someone cannot answer, or if they say nothing, you've exposed something essential. They are not arguing to find the truth. They are arguing to protect their identity. Socrates used this question to expose false philosophers who pretended to seek wisdom but refused to admit they could be wrong. A Stoic man does the opposite. He welcomes correction. He welcomes being wrong, because every correction is an upgrade, a sharpening of his mind. When someone cannot state what would change their mind, they have abandoned reason and slipped into emotional territory. You cannot argue with emotion, but you can expose it. 6. If your claim is true, what else must be true? Now we reach a question that tests the internal structure of their reasoning. Even if a person gives a definition, provides an example, and brings a piece of evidence, that doesn't mean their logic holds. This question pushes the argument into deeper territory. If what you're saying is true, what other conclusions follow from that? This is how contradictions surface. Maybe they're arguing that people don't respect them, so you ask what else must be true. Suddenly they must consider, does no one respect them? Or do they behave in ways that make respect difficult? Or do they confuse respect with validation? Or are they projecting their insecurity onto the world? The question forces reflection. It reveals whether the argument stands alone or whether it collapses when placed under logical weight. Stoics love this question because it exposes hidden assumptions. Assumptions are invisible chains that control behavior without being noticed. Once revealed, they lose power. Why these questions feel uncomfortable? These 3 strikes confront something most people never examine: their mental architecture. When someone is forced to define, prove, exemplify, challenge, and expand their own reasoning, the ego begins to panic. It senses danger, the danger of being wrong, the danger of losing certainty, the danger of having to grow. But a Stoic man doesn't fear this. He understands that discomfort is a sign of intellectual evolution. He understands that truth is more important than pride, and he understands that an idea worth believing must survive pressure. Every argument is a test. Every belief is a candidate for refinement. Socrates knew that the man who refuses questioning is the man who fears himself. But the man who welcomes questioning becomes unbreakable. We've uncovered 6 brutal questions so far. Each one is a blade sharpened to cut through confusion, assumptions, and emotional distortions. But the final 2 questions take the method to its ultimate purpose: not to win, but to reveal. The man who masters all 8 becomes someone who can walk through conflict without being shaken, manipulated, or dragged into emotional chaos. He becomes precise. He becomes calm. He becomes dangerous, not because he attacks, but because he sees clearly. Let's finish the final 2 strikes. 7. What are we actually trying to solve here? Every argument has 2 layers. The surface layer, the words, the complaints, the accusations. The real layer, the unspoken need, fear, insecurity, or problem behind the noise. Most conflicts spiral because people fight at the surface. They argue about symptoms, not causes. This question drags the argument to the core. It forces clarity. Sometimes you discover the person isn't upset about what they said. They're upset about feeling ignored, or overwhelmed, or insecure, or unheard by life itself. Other times you find that the argument isn't even about you. You're simply the nearest target for emotions accumulated elsewhere. Stoicism teaches emotional responsibility. This question brings the argument back to that principle. When you ask, what are we actually trying to solve? You break the cycle of reactive emotion and guide the conversation toward reality. And reality is where problems can finally die. 8. If we removed ego from this conversation, what would change? This is the most devastating question of all, because every argument that continues past logic is powered by one thing: ego. Ego is the enemy of clarity. Ego is allergic to truth. Ego fears exposure more than defeat. When you introduce this question, you kick ego out of the room, or you expose its refusal to leave. If the person becomes defensive, sarcastic, or aggressive, you've confirmed something powerful. They're not defending a point. They're defending an identity built on that point. But if the person pauses, even for a second, The conversation shifts. Humility cracks the armor. Logic steps in, and the argument transforms into something productive. For a Stoic, this question is sacred. It reflects one of the deepest principles of Stoic philosophy. A man who cannot step outside his own ego cannot see truth, nor himself. This final question forces growth, sometimes painfully, sometimes instantly, but always inevitably. It reveals the truth behind every disagreement. Most conflicts are not wars between ideas. They are wars between egos. Remove ego, and clarity returns. Remove ego, and honesty emerges. Remove ego, and the argument ends. How to use these questions as a Stoic. The Socratic method is not about dominance. It's not about humiliating someone or proving superiority. It's about guiding the conversation back to reality, because reality is where a Stoic lives. Use the questions calmly. Use them without sarcasm. Use them without aggression. A calm question is more powerful than a loud argument. These questions are your armor and your sword. They protect you from manipulation. They keep your emotions balanced. They expose lies, confusion, and ego-driven narratives. They strengthen your own reasoning every time you use them. And remember, the goal is not to destroy the other person. The goal is to destroy illusions, starting with your own. A man who can question others without arrogance and question himself without fear becomes a man who cannot be deceived. That is the essence of Stoic philosophy. That is the strength of Socratic questioning. And that is how you become unshakable in a world full of chaos, noise, and fragile egos. In the end, the power of the Socratic method is not in defeating others, but in mastering yourself. A man who questions clearly, listens calmly, and thinks deeply becomes impossible to manipulate and impossible to shake. These 8 brutal questions are your armor against confusion and your compass toward truth. If you're ready to sharpen your mind, strengthen your discipline, and live with unbreakable clarity, subscribe now and join the brotherhood of men who choose reason over ego and growth over comfort.